In Matthew 27, we're going to pick up in verse 32. So, Jewish trial, Pilate, they deliver him to Pilate first thing that morning, all right? How would you describe Pilate's sort of demeanor during this trial? How is he dealing with all this? Is he like, that's it, sure, go ahead, crucify him, whatever? Talk to me. What's he feeling in this thing? He's curious, cautious, okay? He's giving Jesus every chance to get away? What do you mean by that? Because Jesus is pretty much just sort of the passive victim of all of this. Okay, so he's kind of saying to Jesus, if you'll give me permission, I'll let you go. Now, what would have happened if he had just let Jesus go? Who would have? Who is there? Hold on. Who is there at the trial at 8-ish? Remember, he's going to be crucified by 9. Who's there? Jewish leaders are there. Very partisan, if you want to use that word, against Jesus are there in that crowd. And what do they threaten Pilate with? It's very important. What do they threaten Pilate with? All right, and what specifically do they say about reporting him to Caesar? They're going to say, what? If you let him go, if you let this king of the Jews continue and to go, you are what? You remember? No friend of Caesar's. Now, is that a problem for Pilate? I mean, just generically, that's not a good thing, but specifically for Pilate, is that a bad thing? Yes, because he was appointed by whom? Do you remember? His name is Sejanus, who had been executed for trying to usurp the power away from the emperor. All right, and he's on notice. You don't mess. You mess around. You got one shot. You got one chance, and you're going down if you screwed up. All right. So they threaten. You're no friend of Caesar's, and he can feel that he's not getting anywhere with the crowd. They are about to get out of hand. And what happens when your jurisdiction gets out of hand? Who's in trouble? The Pilate. All right. The governor, because that's his job. Maintain order. Maintain order. And you see this play out in The Chosen. The guy who's responsible for the Galilee area is constantly thinking, don't let these people get out of hand. Crush them before you let them get out of hand. Okay? So Pilate eventually washes his hands, says, fine, take him, crucify him, do your thing, hands him over to be flogged by a company of troops. Okay? So we get a lot of the crown of thorns, we get the scarlet robe, we get the reed, the mocking, the beating him, all this stuff takes place, and then he's handed over to be crucified. And that's where we pick up here in 32, okay? So as they were going out, all right, going out of where? Out of the temple complex. They probably were not in the temple complex. They were in what's called the Praetorian, all right? And that would be sort of a part of what, in one corner, I think it's the northwest corner of the temple complex, is called Antonio's Fortress. All right, so there was sort of a barracks set up for the Roman troops to be right there in the temple complex, because if anything was going to go wrong, where was it going to go wrong? If there was any uprising, where was it going to take place? In the temple. So they build this little fortress on the northwest corner of the temple called Antonio's Fortress. Okay? And so they were probably somewhere in that area, not necessarily in the temple complex, but we're not sure. We don't really have a good feel for where he was. But they are going out, probably out of the temple complex, out of the city, going out of the city walls, because Jesus has to be crucified where? Outside the city. All right? He will be taken outside the city. That's repeated several times in the Old Testament. So they're going out. Along the way, I want to kind of throw the sayings of Jesus. We don't get really any in Matthew. We don't get any of the 7 sayings. At this point, as he's going out, Luke includes several, if most, 5 of the sayings, I think. This is where he talks about, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for your city, which is very similar to what he does at the triumphal entry He gets about halfway down and he begins to weep for the city because they did not recognize their visitation. So in this moment, he's actually speaking to the daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. So they found a Cyrenian man named Simon. Okay? Simon's a Cyrenian, all right? And they forced this man to carry his cross. Now, his is a pronoun. Whose cross? You going to go with Jesus? Any other answers? Simon the Cyrenian was forced to carry his cross. Josh is going with Jesus. Anybody else got an answer? His own. Okay. And what do you mean by that? Simon has not been charged with any crime. Why would you say his own, Donna? Okay. Hey, at least you're honest. At least you're honest. I have no idea. You just know me well enough to know I'm asking a trick question, and you're going to go with that answer? Okay. Well, let's think about this. If this is a payment for sin, all right, to satisfy the wrath of God, is this Simon's cross? In a manner of speaking, we could say that, but it was just as much my cross, right? If that's kind of where we're rolling with this thing, whose cross was it? Now, if you want to go really, really literal, who would you say? Whose cross was this? Obvious answer, sort of the higher 30,000-foot view is Simon's, mine, yours, all that. In sort of actual terms, if it had a name written on it, all right, we're going to crucify this person on this today. Whose cross was it? Barabbas. Right? Right? It is a trick question. I know, because that's what I do for a living. Okay? But I wanted to make you think. So it was Barabbas' cross, the most heinous criminal that they had in the time. And yet what happens? Jesus takes his place. So the most heinous criminal of the time, the murderer caught up in a rebellion, those are our two markers, all right, which God allowed the Jewish people to stand there and go, we are so wicked and evil and have so turned away from you that we will choose the most vile criminal that we know of instead of Jesus. All right? And it creates this distinguishing mark, which Peter will come back to 7 weeks later and say, you crucified Jesus when you could have killed Barabbas. And this is when they go, oh my goodness, we really did that. We did that. And that idea of that is a big word, okay? And I think he's allowing them to see for themselves just how vile they have become, but also to let us know that there is no amount of sin that God would not forgive, in it being Barabbas, okay? So just an interesting question. I always like to throw that out. They forced this man to carry Jesus' cross. When they came to a place called Golgotha, okay, it's an Aramaic word which means skull place, all right? They gave him wine mixed with gall to drink, but when he tasted it, he would not, or his will was to not drink it. 35, after crucifying him. Okay, if you look at all four Gospels, here's what we get about the details of the actual crucifixion from the Bible. Matthew says, after crucifying him. Mark says, then they crucified him. Luke says, they crucified him. And John says, they crucified him. So tell me all the details, the gory details of the cross. What are they? What are they in the Bible? They're not there. Be very careful of this. The people they were talking to knew the Greek. Yes, they did. So I don't feel like for them they didn't need to expound. It depends on the audience. I think they understood the concept of crucifixion. They understood this. I want to encourage this. I don't ever like to build more drama into a text, fill in the gory details with things to sensationalize what the Bible does not sensationalize. And I would just say, just be careful with that, all right? Because what we can assume from 2,000 years ago in history, I mean, there was a dozen ways to crucify people. There's a dozen ways to place the hands, the feet. Are they clothed? Are they, is it an X-shaped cross? Is it a T-shaped cross? I mean, all of these details can get thrown in. How long were the nails? How rough was the wood? All of these things can get thrown in there, and we have no clue. And what do the gospel writers let us know? What information is essential that the gospel writers say they have to know this about crucifixion? Yeah, he was. Period. So, yeah, Hunter, you go. I don't
disagree with you.
Yeah.
Expound on what issue could arise from sensationalizing the depiction of the cross.
I think if you're speaking to an audience, especially youth, all right, and I know I experienced this at kind of the youth camp thing, it was, Jesus was, the wood was rough and it scratched against his bare back and the nails were rusted and, you build all this into it and his feet were on this prop. And I mean, I've heard beyond graphic kind of stuff with everything else. And it sensationalizes it. And what happens when you start to add all those details? What do you lose? Just the simplicity of that he died in my place. And your mind gets so caught up in, ooh, this was this, and this was this, and this was so painful, and this was so embarrassing, and so all of these things. And to me, if the gospel writers are just saying they crucified him, that's enough for me. And it's a horrific thing, however they did it. I just don't want us to over-sensationalize. I do the same thing with Gethsemane when it says that his sweat was like drops of blood. And people will do a 10-minute dissertation on if you get so stressed that your capillaries burst and it comes out of your sweat glands and all this stuff. And I'm like, Luke just said it was like drops of blood. It didn't say it was drops of blood. And we get into this sensationalistic idea, and we lose just the understanding of he died in my place. He was crucified in my place. As horrific as we know it to be, the gospel writers never feel the need to sensationalize it. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to downplay. I just want you to think about that. Why, if they made it so simple and just so cut and dried, maybe we should too. All right? So that we don't lose, especially the youth kind of idea, and they get, oh, did you know it was 9 feet tall and 12 feet long nails and rusty? And we don't know any of that. We can presume, we can hear history, but we don't need to. You had a question? Yeah, and I would agree with you with Matthew. I probably can't necessarily, I'm not going to buy into it for Mark's gospel because it was probably written for more of a Roman audience. I wouldn't buy into it necessarily with Luke's gospel. John is probably writing to an Ephesian audience, which they probably would not have experienced this. So I'm not going to, like I said, Matthew, yeah, I can go full bore with that one because it was so prominent there. And I don't know how prominent it was in these cities where they just behaved because they knew of crucifixion. But like I said, all I'm pointing out is the real simple point of they did not feel the need to explain, go into detail. I don't either, because the details are not what is salvific. It's the story that's salvific. It's a story that contains that. So that's all I'm trying to say with that. So, all right, 35. So after crucifying him, they divided his clothes by casting lots. Then they sat down and were guarding him there. Above his head, they put the charge against him, writing, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." And the Jewish leaders had a little problem with this, according to John. All right. What did they say? What did they say in John? Y'all remember? What's that? They said, no, don't write that. Don't write that up there, right? He called himself King of the Jews, or he claimed to be King of the Jews. And how does Pilate respond? That's your problem, not mine. I'm not changing the sign. What I put is what I put, okay? Now, also, John gives us some details in the dividing of his clothes, all right? John identifies that there was a tunic, a garment that was a seamless garment, okay? Now, if you have on a shirt, it's got seams, it's got, shoulders, it's got all these things. This evidently, it's kind of that blanket type garment that would fit over your head, sort of this, it was a seamless garment, so it was just something like a what do they call those things? Poncho. Like a poncho, okay. And so it just fit, evidently that's what they're trying to describe. And they said, don't tear that, don't separate that into different pieces, just leave it intact. And so they cast lots, and one of them, I love this, one of them walked away clothed in the garment of Christ. And Paul uses this example of being clothed in the righteousness of God. So when it says, he became sin so that we might be the righteousness of God. And so this is sort of a picture of this, and I love combining it with the placing the thorns, imputing our sin onto the head, all right, of placing those thorns, that concept, and then one of them is walking away with the garment of Christ on him. All right. Again, that's kind of what Paul kind of uses that example. So I don't know if he got it from this. He never refers to this at all. But anyway, all right. 38. Then two criminals, lestes, all right, generally robbers, all right. That's generally what it came down to. Were crucified with him, one on the right, one on the left. Those who passed by were yelling insults at him, shaking their heads, saying the one who would demolish kataluo, to throw down or to loose down the sanctuary and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself if you are the Son of God. Now that phrase should sound familiar to you. These people who are passing by, you should have done it, and they're jeering, they're mocking him, they're doing this. And they use this phrase, if you're the Son of God, come down from the cross. Where have we heard that phrase, if you are the Son of God, do this? Yeah, when he's being tempted. And who's using this phrase? Again, Satan is not tempting Jesus with bread, with jumping off anything, with doing all this stuff. What's he tempting him with? When he uses this phrase, if you're the Son of God, do this. The temptation has nothing to do with bread. The temptation is all about what? Questioning what? Your identity. Are you really a child of God? Are you really the Son of God? And I think he does that with us as well. Because when he questions our identity, we start to question whether or not we really are a child of God. We start to question, did God really save me? Am I really a child of God? And when you step up and go, no, I am a child of God, you'll start to act like one. Right? When you make that claim in your life, when you renew your mind to that, you will start to act like it. So I just thought that was interesting that they use that phrase at the opportune moment. Come down from the cross. In the same way, the chief priests, scribes, and elders mocked him and said, he saved others, but he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He has put his trust in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, I am God's son. Again, that same type of insult. And 44 says this in Matthew's gospel, in the same way, even the criminals who were crucified with him kept taunting him, or were perpetually taunting him. Now, that sounds wrong, doesn't it? What happened here? The criminals in Matthew's account continue the jeering, continue this mocking. Luke does what with this story, though? Luke has one of them continuing the mocking or picking up on this mocking tone. But then one does what? The other, legend has his name was Dismas, D-Y-S-M-A-S. Dismas, the other one, does what? What does he say? We should be here. He shouldn't. And then he asks him what question? Or he asks one request of him. What is it? Remember me when you go into your kingdom. And Jesus responds to him, speaking from the cross, and says what? Surely you will be with me today in where? Paradise. Interesting. Persian word. It means a walled garden. All right. So it's got that idea, sort of a Revelation 21 understanding of heaven as a walled garden-esque type area. So a lot of people get weird about this because he says, today you will be with me in paradise, but Jesus is in the tomb for 3 days, and he doesn't ascend into heaven later on. So people get really weird about this. If you want to get weird about Jesus and was it today or that day or the next day or 3 days later or 40 days later or whatever, you know what? I don't think you need to go there. I don't think Jesus is going, well, in approximately 38 and a half days, then we'll be together. No, just take it, Jesus, at his word, okay? So today you will be with me. And again, that's in Luke's account. It's not in Mark's or in John's account. It's only in Luke's, which is interesting. Because I believe Luke was writing, I think Luke, in his prologue, he says what? I've written this, an orderly account, based on what? Eyewitness accounts of what has happened. And when you look at the birth narrative of Luke and how detailed it is, who would have those kind of details of the birth narrative of Jesus? Mom, right? Mary. And what do we find? Who's at the cross? Mary. So I think we're getting these same details. Who was probably along the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering? Who was there to hear, daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me? You're going to have enough trouble of your own. Who was there to hear that? All right? You see this? When Jesus is crucified, what does he say about the people crucifying him? What? Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. So where was Matthew during the crucifixion? Curled up in the fetal position somewhere hiding. Where was Peter, who would have conveyed the message to Mark? Next to Matthew, okay? Luke gets his account from someone, and I'm convinced it's Mary. I'm convinced Mary is there. John is going to include other details, but that's just John because he talks about himself, okay? All right. Okay, 45. So that was from 9 until noon, okay? So from 9 until noon, Simon carries the cross. And this is an interesting little point, and I'll throw this out there, and you can kind of see what this is worth. In Mark's gospel, it says, he was Simon a Cyrenian, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Now, I want you to think about your vast biblical knowledge, all right? And I want you to remember or identify a time when a person in the text was identified according to the children they have. How are most people in the Bible identified? This is this person who is the son of the son of the son of, right? Almost all, I think it's always, all right, throughout the Old Testament. And so when Mark writes his, he doesn't say Simon the Cyrenian, the son of the son of the son of. He says he's the father of Alexander and Rufus. Now, why would you do that? Why would you break away from what has always been written? Okay, follow me here. This is interesting. So Mark is writing as Peter kind of dictates the message. They are most likely in Rome at the time. Peter is in Rome, probably in prison, about to be crucified upside down according to Fox's Book of Martyrs. He's dictating all of this stuff to Mark. Mark is writing all this down. And he identifies Simon as the father of Alexander and Rufus. Paul, about this same time, writes a letter to the Roman church called what? Romans, thank you, all right? And in chapter 16, he says, greet Rufus, the one chosen by the Lord. Now, I don't know how common that name is, but in the church in Rome, there is a guy named Rufus. And in Mark's gospel, likely written from Rome in and around the church, he identifies this Simon of Cyrene as being the father of a guy named what? Rufus. Is that the same person? It's certainly a plausible thing. Again, why else would you include this, the father of Alexander and Rufus? Okay? So it's an interesting connection that we have there. Okay? But, so again, 9 o'clock, Simon carries the cross. They crucify him. He's given the wine with gall. He won't drink it. Crucified, clothes divided, plaque above his head, 2 criminals, all the mocking, the jeering. One of the criminals breaks away according to Luke's gospel. Okay? 45. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over the whole land. Period. So what happened for 3 hours? It's just dark. Okay? That's all that happens during that time. So from 9 to noon, we get all those events. And then for the next 3 hours, what do we get? Just darkness. It's really interesting when you look at the 9th plague. Just before the Passover, just before the ending of the wrath of God, ending of the sin, and the freeing of the people of Israel, what do we get in the 9th plague? We get darkness. So in the in the plague progression, we have darkness, and then the 10th is freedom. At the cross for 3 hours, we get darkness, and then Jesus is eventually going to say what? It is finished. Your redemption is finished. You are now what? Free. You see that relationship? I just think that's cool. All right. So 46. So you just sit on 3 hours of darkness. That's all that happens during that time. Nothing happens other than that. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Okay? Now, a lot of people get weird on this one, okay? A lot of people go, he is just asking God, why have you forsaken me? Which a lot of people go, oh, God forsook Jesus on the cross? How could he do that? This is cosmic child abuse. What kind of parent would do this? And that's what you guys believe, that this God just forsook his son and turned away from his son. But you got to understand, Psalm 22 was never called Psalm 22 until someone in the early hundreds, 200 or 300, decided to go, let's make that Psalm number 22. Up to that point, it would have been referred to as, let's sing the psalm, my God, why have you forsaken me? The first line was the title. So if you went to a first century Jewish person and you said, let's quote, let's sing, let's recite, whatever, my God, why have you forsaken me? They would quote to you what we know as what? Psalm 22. Everybody cool with that? Okay. Now, turn in your Bible real quick and let's look at this in Psalm 22. Because at the time, the people hear him say this and they're going, did he say Elijah? Elijah's going to come back? Now, that was foretold in Malachi, that Elijah would come back before the day. So they're like, whoa, their antennas are up. Elijah is going to come back, save him. That's going to usher in the new kingdom, the new heavens, the new age. All right? And so they're getting a little excited about this. But Jesus is not saying that. All right? So in Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's that first line. Why are you so far from my deliverance and from my words of groaning? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, and yet I have no rest. But you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted, and you rescued them. They cried out to you and were set free. They trusted in you and were not disgraced. So Jesus is basically saying, things are really bad right now, but you have a history of rescuing, saving, redeeming, not allowing us to be disgraced. 6, but I am a worm and not a man, scorned by men, despised by people. Everyone who sees me mocks me. They sneer and shake their heads. He relies on the Lord. Let him rescue him. Let the Lord deliver him, since he takes pleasure in him. Now, does that sound familiar? What happens in that first 3 hours? Is he mocked, sneered? Are they mocking him, saying, let God rescue him? Absolutely. Now you got to remember this is written 1,000 years before Christ is ever crucified by King David. All right? 9 says, you took me from the womb, making me secure while at my mother's breast. I was given over to you at birth. You have been my God from my mother's womb. Do not be far from me, because distress is near, and there is no one to help. Now, is that what you would say if you were being crucified? Distress is near, and no one's here to help. All right? 12, many bulls surround me. Strong ones of Bashan encircle me. They open their mouths against me. Lions mauling and roaring. Okay? Now, bulls, especially bulls of Bashan, all right, think about the perfect grazing place for cattle. And not only do you have bulls there, but you got serious bulls. I mean, Matt could make some serious brisket out of these fellas. All right? These are strong, perfect grazing land. They just, if you want a bull, you want a good one, you want a big, strong one, you get one from Bashan. Okay? Bashan is on the Jordan River on the other side, where Reuben, Gad, Manasseh all said, hey, can we stay over here? Because they had cattle. They wanted to graze their land. So when he talks about these bulls, everybody believes he's referring to the religious leaders of his time. Because everybody else was relatively poor, relatively malnourished, if you want to go there, all right? Barely subsistence level. But what are the religious leaders like? I mean, you can think French Revolution here. All the people are starving to death, but how's Marie Antoinette doing? How's the king doing? All right? You go look at portraits, all right? It's not the skinny lady anymore with the six-pack abs working out at the gym. No, there's some chunkies, okay? And they're chunky back then, because why? What did that indicate? You were wealthy. You didn't go work out in the fields. You didn't go do all this stuff. You were a bull, a Bashan bull. So he's mocking the religious leaders who would have been hoarding all of the money while all the people were remaining poor. You see the injustice he's kind of describing? They're encircling him. They refer to him as lions mauling. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are disjointed. Okay? Now, our research on crucifixion indicates that the shoulders would be disjointed. All right? That's part of the suffocating process of crucifixion. My heart is like wax melting within me. Okay? When they stabbed Jesus, when they pierced Jesus at the end, his water and blood flows. All right? They hit the pericardium. Pericardium pours out all the water. Okay? Again, remember, this is 1,000 years before Jesus ever crucified. And some argue that 300 years before Rome is even established, and probably hundreds of years before the concept of crucifixion has ever been really recorded in history. Right? My strength is dried up like baked clay. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You put me in the dust of the earth, which is why Jesus is going to say right before he dies, to fulfill all Scripture, what does he say? I'm what? I'm thirsty. All right? For dogs have surrounded me. Dogs in the Bible, especially as Jesus is referring to the Syrophoenician woman, and she says, can you come heal my son? He says what to him? It's not right for me to take the food away from the children and give it to who? The dogs, the Gentiles. Because I came for the lost sheep of Israel, and therefore you are a dog. So it's kind of an indication of Gentiles. For dogs have surrounded me. This would be the Roman soldiers. A gang of evildoers has closed in on me. Evildoers, the lestes, the criminals on either side. They pierce my hands and feet. Obviously, there's a picture of the crucifixion. I can count all my bones. Some people say because his clothes had been taken away, so you can see all of his bones, and the idea that none of his bones were broken. So when he says you can see all my bones, it's the indication of you can see that they are still together. There's nothing broken there. People look and stare at me. They divided my garments among themselves, and they cast lots for my clothing. All right? Does that sound like anything we have recorded in Matthew 27? Again, 1,000 years before. You know, I was listening to some guy the other day, and he was talking about, well, you believe in Christianity. Well, what about this religion? What about this religion? What about this religion? What about this religion? And he had a kind of a bad answer, but that's just my critique of him. And I was saying that, you know, I look at Christianity and I have evidences to believe this is a true religion. Based on a lot of these prophecies, just like this. I mean, if you came to me and said, here, this was written 1,000 years before Christ is crucified. Now compare it to the account here in Matthew 27. Is that a coincidence that 1,000 years before a king writes this and it comes true to this effect? Go read Daniel 11. Take a Western Civ textbook and read Daniel 11 right next to each other. It is scary. People think Daniel was written after all of this time because it was so accurate. The problem is the Septuagint translated it before all of it happened. All right? And so when I, again, talking about the other religions, what I say to them is, look, I will listen to them, I will read them, I will see their text, but I don't have any evidence to believe that is a true statement. I have nothing compelling that says this is true. I just have a lot of sort of platitudes and opinions and flowery statements about a divine being. But I have nothing that I could lock onto and say, there's fulfilled prophecy, I will believe this. All right? So I'm not discounting all the other religions. I'm just saying they're nice little religious writings. This one has proof. This one has evidence that I can say, that was fulfilled, that was fulfilled, that was fulfilled, that was fulfilled. I'm believing this one. All right? That's how I would answer people. And Psalm 22 is basically the key to that. Okay? Let's go to verse 50. Y'all back in 27? Go with me? Okay, cool. All right. Jesus shouted again with a loud voice and gave up his spirit. All right, this word gave up is aphiemi. All right, when Peter and Andrew are in the boats and Jesus says, come follow me, what do? They drop their nets. All right, this is our word for forgiveness. Maybe some of us should tap into this. The idea of forgiveness is to do what? Here's your sins, and I've got a hold of them. It doesn't mean put them in your back pocket and save it for later when I need to throw it in your face. All right? To forgive someone is to take it and go, it's gone. I let it go. I'm not going to deal with that anymore. When when the disciples are getting all over Mary because she poured this expensive perfume, and they're like, we could have sold that and given it to the poor. He says what? Drop it. Aphiemi. Forgive her. Leave her alone. Let it go. And this is what Jesus does. He let go of his spirit in this moment, entrusting it to whom? Because the words of Jesus is, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. I drop my spirit and I trust you to pick it up. All right? And then we have the other saying is, it is finished. Also, in the midst of this sort of back half, right before he's about to die, John includes the idea, he sees Mary, he sees the beloved disciple, and he says what? Woman, this is your son. Son, this is your mother. That sort of exchange there at the cross that John includes, no one else does. So you can take that for whatever you say. All right, 51. This is where it gets a little interesting, and then it gets really wonky. All right, so suddenly, all right, the curtain of the sanctuary was split in two. How? From top to bottom. Okay, now how tall is top? Think about this is in the holy place. So you've got, as you walk in, you've got the bread of the presence. Breathe that in, some nice fresh bread. You got the lampstand over here, this massive lampstand. It's all covered in gold. You got the lampstand bouncing light everywhere. You have the incense altar right there in front of this veil. All right. Some people say it was 75 feet high. Some people record that it was 4 inches thick. Now imagine a curtain 4 inches thick. 75 feet high, and it was torn, how? From top to bottom. Now, how in the world would you tear a 4-inch curtain, much less do it 75 feet in the air, all right? And what color was it? Purple. Thank you. Scarlet and blue. Because everything in the tabernacle, everything in the temple that was embroidered was blue, purple, and scarlet. So Israel's king, his blood was shed, and it was torn into, so that what? Now, the priest could go into the holy place, but now that this has been torn, now we have what? Access to the very presence of God. Up until this point, who was allowed to go into the most holy place, the Holy of Holies? Only the high priest, only once a year, only on the Day of Atonement. And now that curtain has been torn. All right? That's good news right there. All right? Now, we get earthquakes, rock split. The tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints, the holy ones, who had fallen asleep, were raised. And they came out of the tombs after his resurrection. Now, that's an interesting thing because they're saying the tombs were opened, and the feel of this is when? When are the tombs being opened? So Jesus is on the cross from 9 to noon. From noon to 3, it's what? Darkness. And then after 3, we get this sort of bang, 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 my God, why have you forsaken me? We get the into your hands I commit my spirit. I'm thirsty. It is finished. And then we get the rocks and the earthquakes and the curtain tearing and the tombs opening, but they don't come out of the tomb until when? After what? Who is his? Jesus' resurrection, which is going to be when? It's going to be a couple of days. So this is why I say it gets a little wonky here. It gets just a little weird, and everybody kind of critiques Matthew for this because we don't have anybody backing up this account of the tombs opening, people coming back to life, all of these things. It gets real interesting when you start to think of, well, could they have been raised from the dead if Christ is the first to be raised from the dead? Or is this sort of a Lazarus, they were raised from the dead but then died off again kind of a thing? And so it just gets a little weird here. So, and none of the other gospel accounts have anything like it whatsoever, which is odd because usually if Matthew has it, Mark has it. So just don't get weird. Don't let anybody corner you on that. Go, yeah, it's really cool. Anyway, all right, 54. When the centurion and those with him, so all of those that have been partaking in this, when they, who were guarding Jesus, saw the earthquake and the things that happened, they were terrified. Yeah, you think? Earthquake, rock splitting, tombs opening, all this stuff. All right, I'm sure they couldn't see the curtain being torn, but I'm sure that didn't help any. They said what? This man really was God's son. Truly, this was God's son. Okay, now, if you're a Roman centurion and you say, truly, this was God's son, are you saying that this really was the son of Yahweh, God of Israel? What would a Roman soldier saying these words, truly, this was God's son? What's he saying? What is he, in his understanding, in his theology, if you want to use that word, what is he saying? Is he saying, oh, this was the God of the Bible, this is his son? Maybe if he has some theology that has, almost like a Cornelius, where he's a God-fearing person who's been there, it's just as likely that what he's saying was, this was a son of God. All right? This was someone who was bigger than all of us. This is something unique, okay? Luke actually has it, this was a righteous man, okay? So Matthew has him saying, this is God's son. Mark says, this is God's son. Luke says, this was a righteous man. So when you have that kind of pulling, you kind of go, okay, I don't know what they were exactly saying, but it sounds like they're leaning towards it was some type of divine character to the way this man died. All right? And again, this is a centurion running a group of soldiers that knew what they were doing and had seen many, many, many people die. So it's just interesting. 55. Many women who had followed Jesus from Galilee ministered to him were there, looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's son. So James and John's mom. All right? 57. When it was evening, a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph came, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. He approached Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Then Pilate ordered that it be released. Now, in there, John has the account of Pilate was surprised. How is he dead so soon? Which should speak a little bit to sort of the tortuous nature of crucifixion, all right? That Pilate is surprised because it's only been 7 hours, 8 hours maybe at this point. And he's like, he's dead already? He's supposed to just continue breathing, continue living, and suffer for days on end, okay? So he's surprised that he's already dead, all right? Pilate ordered that it be released to him or given over to him. So Joseph took the body, wrapped it in clean, fine linen, and placed it in a new tomb, which had been cut into the rock. John also includes, Nicodemus was there as well. Nicodemus actually bought the spices and bought the stuff so that they could properly bury him, which makes sense because where else do we find Nicodemus? We find him in 2 other occasions in the New Testament. Where do you think those might possibly be? So we have 3 recordings of Nicodemus. They're all found in John. Okay? John 3, I want to say John 7 or 8, Nicodemus kind of comes to Jesus' defense when they're starting to accuse him. He goes, hey, we don't do this. This is not the way we do things. They go, oh, are you one of his followers too? And he kind of slinks back, right? And then we have him, Nicodemus, we pick him up again at the burial of Christ. So again, John's the only one that records all 3 of those times. Matthew, Mark, and Luke never have Nicodemus in their text, all right? Given the body, placed in a new tomb, which he had cut in the rock, he left after rolling a great stone, a megaslithos, against the entrance of the tomb. And 61 says very clearly, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were seated there facing the tomb, opposite, literally away from away from the tomb. So they're kind of that distance from it, which is important. Why? Because what's Mary Magdalene and the other Mary and the other women going to do 2 days later, essentially, on Sunday? They're going to go back there. So a lot of people go, well, they went to the wrong tomb and they did that. And so Matthew is saying, no, they were standing there looking at it. They knew exactly where this tomb was, all right? And they were able to go back to it very easily, okay? I think that's all he's trying to say with that, okay? 62. The next day, which followed the preparation day, all right? Now, which really is interesting because if it's the next day, what day is it? He was crucified on Friday, so if it's the next day, what day is it? Saturday, which is what? The 7th day. What are they supposed to do on the 7th day? Not go running around trying to secure soldiers, right? All right. I think that's what Matthew's trying to tell his Jewish audience. These people did all this, and on top of that, they went on the Sabbath, not just a Sabbath, the Sabbath literally the day after Passover, like the biggest Sabbath of all, right? They went and tried to cover all this up. So the next day that followed the preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, Sir, we remember that while this deceiver was still alive, he said, after 3 days, I will rise again, which is just funny to me because what did the disciples remember about what Jesus said about rising again? I've asked the question many times. Who was at the tomb with balloons and firecrackers and celebration with the banner, welcome back, Jesus? None of them. But who did remember, hey, there was this resurrection talk? These guys, the religious leaders, remember this, which it's hard for me to believe that just straight up, that they would have remembered that well, but the disciples, I don't even know what you're talking about, okay? You can do with that whatever you want, okay? But they wanted to secure this. 64, therefore give orders that the tomb be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come, steal him, and tell the people, he has been raised from the dead. Then the last deception, this deception of the resurrection, will be worse than the first. The first being probably his teaching, healing ministry that led the people into, quote unquote, deception, okay? So, and Pilate replies, you have a guard of soldiers. You have a custodian, all right? Now, what are two ways we could take that? You have soldiers, use yours, or he could be saying, here, you can have soldiers to secure the tomb, all right? It can go either way. The language is just not clear enough to say one way or the other. So, all right, so to me, Pilate would be more inclined to go, just do it yourself, all right? Imagine at the end of this day, is he going, oh, well, I'll definitely look in on this. I don't know. You can do it whatever you want. Pilate told them, go and make it as secure as you know how. Then they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting the guard. And that's how the day ends. All right? Questions, thoughts? Good Friday, right? I've always struggled with calling it Good Friday because it's just such a tragic story. It's an absolutely tragic story. I like to use the word romance about this, which seems really weird because romance, we think flowers, chocolates, Valentine's Day, hearts, and all that stuff. But romance is the pursuit of beauty. It's the pursuit of something beautiful. Somebody will refer to war as romantic. I think people who have been in war would disagree, but it's the pursuit of doing something noble and honorable and beautiful. And so I look at this, and as tragic as this was, and as horrific as it was, and as painful as it must have been on 100 different levels, it was the very thing that bought me access into the throne of God. And I can come boldly before the throne of God because of this day. Because Christ said, no, I will go. Not my will, but your will. I could call down legions of angels, but I'm not going to. Am I the Messiah? It is as you say, when he could have been silent. It's him standing there and taking all the abuse, and him standing there and just enduring this and saying, Father, forgive them, when he's literally forgiving them as he's saying these words. And I like the fact that the Gospels do not sensationalize the details, because the effect of what he did that day, him laying down his life for me, that's what I need to renew my mind to every single day. That's what I need to sit before this cross, and I need to say something to Christ on the cross. And it's so clear to me what we need to say. And what saves us is a belief that what he did was effectual. And if what he did was effectual and it benefited me by giving me access to God himself, the Father, then I can't help but say thank you. I cannot help but say thank you. And I cannot help but lay my life down, all right, like we've been talking about in 1 John. What Paul talks about in Romans 12. Renew your mind to what Christ has done so that you may become a living sacrifice. And to live, not just say the words thank you, but literally to be the living sacrifice that which honors God himself. And to carry that out day after day after day. Every single moment is a moment where I can express my gratitude for what happened and what transpired on this day. Okay? So, all right? All good? All right. One more week? All right? Should we do like a celebration next week of, we're going to have an Easter celebration of Easter in June. So, Easter in June next week. We'll finish up. All right? Let's pray. Father, thank you so much.